Good morning, everybody. It's great to be in Sydney here. As you probably can hear, I'm not from here. I'm not Australian. There will be a quiz afterwards from where I am. The name doesn't give it away, as obviously. I run this organization called Customer Experience and Engagement. You probably scratch your head and think, what is that? We'll talk about it later, why we are organized like that, but in a nutshell, it's basically support, it's high-touch customer engagement, it is product security, it's quality assurance, is internal IT, and probably, documentation. There's a bunch of things in my org. You think, oh, it's really odd how they're structured. I'll talk a little bit later about it. Now, digital transformation is the buzzword of the day, right? Everybody talks about it. And we know, fundamentally, there is stuff happening in the market, right? Unfortunately, that term has been used by every tech company, right? You can go probably to companies that have nothing to do with digital transformation, and they use digital transformation for whatever buzzword, right? What is digital transformation, right? And so it's not about products. It's about building new capabilities, right? That you can innovate more quickly. Like either you can react to disruption, or you can even predict disruption, right? That is, in my opinion, the capabilities you're building to actually react or lead digital transformation. Building new capabilities with your employees, that's not easy. That's hard, right? It's really hard because you got to get out of the traditional way, you got to be prepared for doing things differently, right? Now, like you are being disrupted, right? A few years ago, you probably thought, it was like, is my business really being disrupted? Maybe you were in a government space, right? And you're kind of thinking, yeah, well, unlikely that I get disrupted, right? But will it remain that way, right? And disruption happens not like a financial startup. Like Switzerland, we have a few banks. There's a lot of financial startups, right? The fintechs. What do they try to be? They don't try to be the next bank. They're looking at where does the bank actually make money or create a horrible customer experience, and that's what they attach, right? They innovate on one part, right? Use the blockchain, right? Whatever innovation it is. It's not trying to be the next bank. It's trying to actually innovate in certain specific areas. Now, let me take a little tour into something that happens in Switzerland, and I'll talk about disruption there without putting the slide on yet. So what are we doing in Switzerland? We got banks, right? Yeah, that's a lot of disruption. We got pharmaceuticals, not so much disruption, but maybe a little bit. Let's go to a small valley in the mountains. We also have a lot of valleys, a lot of mountains, a lot of snow. Put yourself in the shoes of a ski resort. What is the disruption for a ski resort? Are you with me? Think about it. You're in this little valley, there's mountains all over you, you only have 2 hours daylight because the sun gets cut off from the mountain. You sit in this valley. What is the disruption that will happen to this little place? Let me give you the example. One ski resort called Saas-Fee. It's 2015, you see revenue down, skier days down, hotel days down. What is that resort doing? They say, we got to change things. So in 2016, they called it the hammer deal, right? And usually a season pass is $1,000, Swiss francs, so a little bit more than Aussie dollars. They said, if we in October can sell 100,000 season passes by October, I think 15th, we'll give them away for 222 francs. So like they drop the price if they sell 100,000 by October 15th. What happens? They do. Everybody buys it. 222 francs is like 3 days skiing. They sell season passes like crazy, right? And you see the results, 2017, overnight revenue, I don't know what that means actually. The revenues for the overnights go up like crazy, 45% hotel stays up. What happened to that small village? All of a sudden, it's going gangbusters, right? It's like everybody goes there. Let me give you an example. I never go skiing there. It's so far away, so remote. I actually bought that pass. It's 222 francs. Why wouldn't you do, right? And what happened? I did spend 5 days there, right? So it worked, right? So what's the disruption? Now, think about Switzerland. We got a lot of valleys. What happened to the ski resort in the valley next over, right? All of a sudden, they got disrupted. All of a sudden, they are standing there as in, do we just drop the price? You couldn't drop the price at that point, right? That whole show was over. They've been doing it for 3 years. Now, 2016, 17, 18. You know, that was a one-time disruption. You know, kind of, you can put, I mean, we got to look at this in 2 or 3 years. Will that still remain? You can guess what happened since then in that disruption. Other resorts did the same thing or similar things, right? All of a sudden, the industry got kind of changed. Now, let's go away from skiing. I could talk about skiing the whole day, but I guess you're not here for that. Engaged but not ready. So if you ask customers, right, are you ready to actually engage in form of transformation, right? It's 90% say they are engaged in some form of digitization. It's interesting to see that term, digitization, right? That goes back to like 2000, right? That's the buzzword of the early 2000s. I was at HP, we used digitization. There is a difference between digitization and digital transformation. One is, in my opinion, is just make your op go smoother, right? Remove basically paperwork and make it digital. That's not digital transformation, in my opinion. That's just running your operations different. Being ready for digital transformation is different, right? 16% say the company has responded with bold strategy and at scale. So they are kind of building those capabilities I mentioned early on. Now you ask, it's like, what does Red Hat know about digital transformation? Margaret talks about ski resort, but they have no idea what really digital transformation is, or disruption, right? Well, we did do some disruption. If you look at the IT industry over the last 20 years, 1993, Red Hat got founded. I'm not saying that was the disruption, but it was the start of the open source disruption. In 2001, 2002, when basically our first Red Hat Enterprise Linux got launched, right, 2.1 advanced server, and going on with our model, business model of subscription, selling subscriptions instead of licenses, that was a transformation, right? Today, open source is accepted, right? It's everywhere accepted, right? There's very few customers that still challenge us if open source is going away, right? Same people that say the internet might not stick around, right? So, you look at this timeline, Tesla, AWS, Uber, Airbnb, but Red Hat, we did some serious disruption. There's a few quotes from leaders at HP, IBM, funny enough. Not actually reading them. I think the interesting one here is Microsoft, right? When I started at Red Hat, end of 2005, Microsoft wasn't a friend. You probably remember Steve Ballmer jumping up and down and calling us evil, right? They changed quite a bit, right? With the new CEO, they embraced open source quite a bit. We are all in on open source. So that was the disruption we did over the last 20 years. I look forward to the next 20 years of disruption. Now, you maybe have heard our CEO, Jim Whitehurst, to talk about planning is dead, right? That comes from the old way, plan this, prescribe, and execute, right? We've all done that, and you probably still do it, right? We plan it for like a 3-year journey. We kind of prescribe, hey, what are the parameters, what are the KPIs, or whatever you call them, and then we execute against those parameters, right? That is very static, right? If something changes in between, what are you actually doing, right? I'll give you one example. If you're just in this model, if something happens in between, what do you do? I'll give you an example. Way back, 2006, 2007, our friends at Oracle decide to actually launch this thing called Oracle Unbreakable, right? To compete with Red Hat on the Linux, right? On one day, we knew that in the evening, right? Kind of like I was in Boston at that time, and in the evening we heard about Oracle launching this Unbreakable. And so there was we have a mailing list on the company what's going on. How do we react on that, right? If we just had it planned, we didn't plan for this. What happened was one engineer says, well, we should call it Red Hat Enterprise Linux Unfakeable. And people loved it, right? And this is in the evening. Think about it. Boston is 3 hours ahead of the West Coast, right? West Coast, early. We decided to take that unfakeable. The team in San Francisco was at the Oracle World. They actually printed T-shirts, red T-shirts, unfakeable, Red Hat logo. Next morning at the booth, all of our folks there had this shirt. This wasn't planned. This was an amazing collaboration, right? It was empower people that just do what needed to be done. And that's kind of what we're talking about. Instead of the plan, prescribe, execute, configure. Configure means you put the right people and maybe the right practices in place. That keeps your organization aware of what's going on, what's changing around it. That's the configure. The enable is you give them authority. You give them kind of empowerment, as in like, yeah, you can print that T-shirt. We don't mind, right? That's good, right? And engage, as in like, you as a manager, not just looking at what happens, but really like try to inspire them to take risks, try to inspire them to actually change things, right? Disrupt yourself constantly. I'll give you an example on the configure. I mentioned my org is very strange, right? I have support, I have quality assurance, I have a bunch of other things. That's the configuration. I always joke in HP, I did a similar role, but in HP, I was reporting to basically an ops manager, right? So I always jokingly say, well, support in a lot of traditional license company, they're part of janitorial services, right? Because you make your money with licenses and then the rest just get clean up. We are part of engineering because we know that the product experience, customer experience got to be different. That's the configure, right? How we are set up, just as an example. Now, if you look at it from a software, we are a software company, if you look at it from an IT perspective, right? Configuration is, yes, it's your people, it's really, really important. It's also your architecture for the future, right? If you're still running everything on mainframe, it's much harder to actually innovate, right? Instead of having a flexible architecture, be it a container-based or an OpenStack-based, where you have much more flexibility, right? Enablement is the agile process, right? And I don't mind if it's Scrum or Kanban or whatever agile. It can also be an agile waterfall, but you got to have some flexibility in your processes. And the engage is the collaboration, right? And that's where we at Red Hat, we live off collaboration, right? And across functions, right? And that's what you got to, as a leader, you got to inspire people to actually collaborate, right? Now enough of Red Hat. Let's get a client up here, Wayne Marchant from Heritage Bank, that went through like a journey similar to us. Let me get Wayne up here. Thank you, Wayne. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a few questions, Wayne. First of all, you probably know Heritage Bank, but if you can just tell us what Heritage Bank is, the history, and kind of what you guys do.
Yeah, so Heritage was formed in 1875, so we've been around for 143 years, and we're a customer-owned bank, so our customers are our shareholders, and we were one of the first peer-to-peer lenders in Australia, and today we still provide loans to mums and dads across Australia. Through our branches in southeast Queensland and through the broker network.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear. That's quite an old bank for that. Yeah. So you went through you had to make a decision, right, organizationally, for kind of going forward to a transformation. What triggered that?
There was probably a couple of things. New CEO always triggers new thought processes, but he brought in a new management group, of which I was one, and also, we took a view that if we were going to answer digital change that we knew was coming into banking, we had to take our bank, which is very much a physical bank with a bit of a digital presence, and change it to be a digital bank, but still with that physical presence, because we think the branches are an important element, but being digitally aware and digitally able was really important.
So that makes a lot of sense. What did that mean for actually what kind of changes you had to trigger behind?
Well, particularly in IT, we needed to significantly transform our team. We were very old school. very old school development, very old school tools. So, we decided that middleware was where we really had to start. We had to make things fit together because everything was way too slow. It was too slow to make changes, too slow to integrate, too slow to implement anything. And, we're talking like not months, we're talking 18 months to do things. It was just way too long. So, we knew that starting with that middleware was going to make a huge difference to our business.
What was the hard part about changing the middleware or around the middleware?
It was the change of the people. The hardest thing we had to do really was change the people and their thought processes. We didn't have the processes, we didn't have the technology, we didn't have any skills in this space. So, we had to make significant change. We chose Red Hat because we knew Red Hat across our stack could do almost everything that we needed. And then we chose the Open Innovation Labs because we knew that they could fast track the change for our business. And they could assist us in a huge change in a very short period of time and bring our staff not only on the change in the technology, but the agile journey as well, which was something brand new to our staff.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to see if clients come to our innovation labs, right? It's not just about technology, that's part of it, but actually getting inspired kind of like by the agile way and by, I think, the open way as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the key for us was when we ran our second innovation lab, we brought the business in on the journey as well. And that then brought the senior executives in, it brought the board in, it brought everybody in involved in what we were doing, and everybody then could see the massive change and the speed of delivery change that we could do by delivering agile without the technology even, just by changing the way we did things, and then by including the technology, the massive change we could make to our business.
Yeah, it's actually interesting what you mentioned. I'll talk about it afterwards, right? But kind of like you start in a small environment, but then you actually bring your executive leadership along on the journey. That's good. Yeah. You mentioned something else yesterday I just want to highlight. It's like when you change kind of how people work, right? It wasn't like changing the people, you actually trained people quite a bit, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of training. We actually have a website that the guys can go to, which has a chunk of free training, which you can get on open source, but also we paid for the Red Hat training for every team member that joined the innovation labs. And they spent a lot of time doing each training course to make sure that they got the skills that they need. And they were able to then, as they were developing, go back to that training course and teach themselves something if they didn't know how to do it.
That's great, Wayne. I told you I'll surprise you with a question. Here it comes. What's the recommendation to the audience?
Really, to consider innovation labs. If you've got a team that needs to be changed, and really needs, and you want to drive something fast, you can take a business problem, give it to the innovation labs, and really they can help you drive to a solution really quickly. And both of our innovation labs delivered solutions into production and delivered them really well.
That's great, Wayne. That was a good, actually, recommendation. Yeah. Thank you very much, Wayne.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's, I do this with many customers, and I have to say every story like that is very inspirational, as in how a bank or whatever company can change. I think that's really cool. And it's also cool for us as Red Hat to see how that journey starts. Speaking of start, right, if you think about digital transformation, right, how do you start, right? As in, Wayne made a good example, right, to kind of thinking about, maybe from top down, they got some pressures and hey, we got to change, right? But then you still think, it's like, how do you start? How do you build new capability? How do you build new processes? How do you change people's behavior, which is usually the hardest, right? There is no answer, right? Let me try to explain a few things we do, and maybe it helps in your journey, how to start your journey, right? React and anticipate, right? I think we talked a little bit about React when I talked about that ski resort, right? Or that Oracle unfakeable or our unfakeable to the unbreakable, right? That's a reaction. To actually get a reaction, it's not so easy, right? If you are in a very stubborn plan, prescribe, execute, to actually jump and actually change something quickly to react, it's very hard, right? If you don't have an infrastructure, if you don't have actually people that actually can actually move quickly, right? It's really hard. I'm sure you've seen it. I actually see it as well, right? You know, I think Red Hat is awesome, but even us, sometimes we're like, how do we react? It's like, we can't take like 6 months for a change. You gotta be quick, right? And that's a lot of fundamentals, right, that you gotta do, right? Now, if you want to go to anticipate, right, that's even harder, right? And you look at the industry, right? I mean, sometimes it's puzzling, right? Blockbuster, it's an old example, right? As in, how did Blockbuster not react when Netflix come along, right? They probably thought, oh, Netflix is small, right? Our business will be safe, right? And that journey, right? As in, how could have a Blockbuster or any company anticipated what will change, right? Independent of that, building the capabilities like Wayne talked about, kind of being in an innovation lab, building the capabilities from a technology and also from a people process, that's the foundation, right? I'll talk about anticipation a little bit further when we talk about technology a bit. Top down, bottom up. Just use Wayne's example again, right? Top down, yes, the new CEO came in and said, yeah, we got to change something. I'm sure he didn't prescribe exactly what needed to be changed, right? Kind of knew we have to change, right? The bottom-up approach is what we use much more at Red Hat, right? If you configure and actually empower your team, you get more response from the bottom up. Now, I'll give you the example of the t-shirt, right? That was a bottom-up thing. That wasn't like our chief marketing officer said, hey, we're printing this t-shirt, right? It was something bottom-up. Now, you got to combine both things, right? That's really what actually drives success, right? You can't just be top-down in the new world. You can't just be bottom-up because you might have a little bit chaos on your hand. If you can actually change the top-down, being less prescriptive, but actually more engaging and actually setting boundaries, this is the direction we got to go. These are the boundaries, and actually enable people to actually do the bottom-up. That really helps in actually getting change done quickly. Go big, start small, right? It goes top down, bottom up. One of the things that we've seen, and we do it at Red Hat as well, if you want funny story, a few years ago we had a new executive came in and called it the big transformation process for Red Hat. It was the back end. How do we transform the back end? We got in one of the big consulting firms. There was a lot of effort, big, kind of top down. Guess what happened to that project? I'm sure you've seen one of those projects at your firm. It didn't go well. That executive is no longer with Red Hat. We have a lot of transformation that start small. Like one team innovates with some other teams around some small problems. You know, that team has successes. It builds on top of the successes. It kind of all of a sudden gets attention of senior executives. It's not like a shadow process. It's just very small, and it's very focused on success. Wayne mentioned it as well. They went in an innovation lab, and all of a sudden they had some success. All of a sudden the senior leadership paid attention. You know, start small, but not too small. If you start too small and nobody notices, that's probably a waste of time. But that combination is really critical. And I see a lot of customers that do it in the start small. Again, focused. It's not like just a hack. It's something focused. You add people, you add processes, and you actually let it grow, and you actually foster the growth pretty quickly. That is what actually can make success pretty fast. You got to scale it fast, right? You don't keep it small for long, right? Now, this is not, I just gave you a few examples. You can read the book, The Open Organization from Jim Whitehurst, that gives you more insight on how we actually work internally. We are not selling these capabilities, right? So you can't come to us and say, hey, Max, give me the SKU for actually the open organization. I want to introduce it in company. I'm sure Max would like to sell it, but it's not something that can be sold because each of these situations are unique for your company, right? But our obligation, and we feel strongly about that, even after we will be part of IBM, we got to share this because this leads to innovation and actually kind of disruption, right? Like we did over the last 25 years. It's how we've been able to predict what's next. And I'll give you one example out of the technology, last example. If you remember a few years ago, we had RHEL 5, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5. Who remembers that? Yeah. What was unique about RHEL 5? It had virtualization built in. There was a small company called VMware that was talking about virtualization. We just threw it into RHEL 5. The first time we picked virtualization, what did we pick? We picked a technology called Zen. That was in RHEL 5, right? That was that project. What happened? Some of the engineers got a little bit worried about Zen. They're kind of starting talking, that community, you know, the open source community of Zen, it's a bit fishy, there's stuff going on. And it was kind of those signs from some engineers that kind of triggered more the thinking, we got to do something. And Zen actually moved to like a different model. They wanted the license, right? It was not what we could do. So we actually anticipated there will be a disaster happening there. It didn't happen immediately, but we decided, okay, we got to look around at different alternatives. The alternatives was a small company in Israel called Kubernetes that had a hypervisor called KVM. The rest is a history, right? You probably know KVM is used everywhere, and it's basically de facto standard now for the hypervisor. But that was something we actually anticipated. It wasn't anticipated because the chief strategist from Red Hat smelled that there was something fishy. It was actually the engineers that actually figured out there is something in this community that didn't work. What did that require from the leadership team? It required to be actually open-minded and actually listen to it. It actually required our CEO, and he tells that story very well. He had to go to the board and tell the board, hey, I'm buying this company in Israel for 130 million or whatever it is. And the board asked, well, do they have revenue? No. Do they have intellectual property? No, not really. It's all open source. So why are we buying this company? It took the CEO to actually convince the board this was a strategic move in anticipation of actually something was happening to the Zen base, which wouldn't be true to our model. It also led to, think about this, we changed, within RHEL 5, we changed the hypervisor. We actually added KVM, first as a tech preview, you could play with it, and over time we made it a default configuration. That's kind of what you got to be open. We didn't plan that. This happened over time. That's how you predict trends. The same happened with Kubernetes, right? The same happened with Docker, right? How did that happen? All of a sudden, there's several engineers talking about this new thing, Docker, right? It wasn't really new. Linux containers go back, way, way back, but it was kind of this company that packaged it differently. But that's kind of being open and listening to trends. That helps you to actually be on, be prepared and actually anticipate change. And the whole collaboration between, right? This sounds very naive, but if you actually believe in this, how we actually get to better results by collaborating, being transparent, being direct and frank, it leads to a lot of cool stuff for us, it leads to a lot of cool stuff for you guys. So with that, I want to hand it back and appreciate your time.